The Galactic Academy for Extraordinary Combative Arts wasn't extraordinary at all, despite what the brochure claimed. It was in fact a glorified bureaucratic solution to an age-old problem: what to do with the various species' most promising warriors when they weren't actively killing each other. The answer? Throw them into standardized education, of course. The Academy floated in the nebula between the Corellian and Vexara systems. Neutral territory, as the administrators liked to remind everyone whenever another dining hall brawl broke out. Its architecture resembled what might happen if a drunk architect with a fetish for chrome and impossible angles was given unlimited funding and zero oversight. Every corridor curved unnecessarily. Every doorway stood at slightly the wrong height for at least 16 different species. And the bathrooms, well, let's just say that evolution had created far too many different excretory needs for any single facility to accommodate comfortably. Among the 2,837 students representing 94 sentient species, there existed a hierarchy so complex it required specialized AI just to track who should be snubbing whom at breakfast. At the top perched the Viridians, 8-limbed reptiloids, whose ancestors had apparently conquered half the known galaxy before humans had figured out agriculture. Below them, arranged in descending order of intimidation factor and historical conquest tallies, were the usual suspects of spacefaring societies. And then, somewhere near the bottom, just above the methane-breathing Gloprians, who couldn't even enter standard atmosphere without liquefying, were the humans. The particular human in Combat Class 505, Advanced Close Quarters Neutralization, sat in the back row, as humans tended to do. Her standard-issue training uniform hung slightly loose on a frame that appeared downright fragile compared to her classmates. She never volunteered answers, never initiated conversations, and never complained when paired with partners 3 times her mass. The instructor's roster listed her as R. Blake, though no one bothered learning human designations. What made R. Blake notable was precisely how unnotable she seemed determined to be. In a school where every species strutted their evolutionary advantages, whether it was the Carathians' poisonous skin secretions or the Montavians' ability to perceive 4 seconds into the future, this human displayed nothing whatsoever. She simply observed, practiced the assigned maneuvers with mechanical precision, and vanished between classes. "Look at it," hissed Thexgal, a 7-foot Viridian whose scales shimmered with bioluminescent patterns indicating his royal lineage. Just sitting there, pretending it belongs. His companion, a hulking Juraxian with forearms like small tree trunks, rumbled in agreement. Heard its planet was barely interstellar, still fighting over dirt and imaginary borderlines. The human gave no indication she heard them, though the Academy's universal translators ensured she had. She simply continued reviewing combat formations on her datapad, her expression as blank as the void between stars. Little did anyone know that the hierarchy was about to receive the kind of recalibration that would make the Academy's founding look like a minor historical footnote. Combat training at the Galactic Academy wasn't just another course requirement, it was the entire point. The galaxy had enjoyed what politicians optimistically called sustained peace for the past 83 standard cycles, which everyone else recognized as barely contained hostility. The Academy served as a pressure valve. Let the next generation's warriors beat each other senseless in controlled environments rather than turning planets into smoking debris fields. Professor Klavex, a retired Viridian war master missing 3 of his original 8 limbs, teaching moments he called them, paced the training floor with the practiced menace of someone who had killed more beings than most had met. "Combat is not about strength," he lectured, his translator barely keeping up with the complex clicks and hisses of his native tongue. "Combat is about recognizing the exact moment your opponent realizes they are about to die, and then extending that moment for as long as possible." The class contained 32 students, representing 27 species, arranged in an unspoken but universally understood pecking order. At the front stood Dravenok, a Calaxian apex warrior and living testament to evolutionary overkill. Standing 8 feet tall, with exoskeletal armor naturally secreted through his pores, Dravenok possessed reflexes so fast that Academy sensors sometimes failed to register his movements. His kind had evolved on a death world where the atmosphere itself periodically ignited, which explained both his fireproof hide and charming personality. The Calaxians weren't just at the top of the combat hierarchy. They had practically invented the concept. Their empire spanned 17 systems, all acquired through what their diplomatic corps delicately termed aggressive negotiations. They were living weapons, and Dravnok was their pride and joy, sent to the academy not to learn, but to remind everyone else of their proper place in the universe. Today, Professor Klevax announced, mandibles twitching with what might have been excitement, we begin mortal strike sequences. Non-lethal, of course. He added with what sounded suspiciously like disappointment. The students shifted nervously. All except the human R. Blake, who continued her habit of existing without drawing attention. She sat cross-legged at the edge of the training mat, eyes half closed in what many mistook for fear or boredom. Did you see? Whispered a gelatinous Floxy student to its neighbor. The human didn't even flinch. Probably doesn't understand the implications, responded the neighbor, a four-armed Trilaxian. Their species barely survived their first contact wars. They're practically infants in galactic terms. The Floxy wobbled in what passed for a shrug. I heard they still use projectile weapons on their homeworld. Actual metal propelled by chemical explosions. Barbaric. Primitive species, agreed the Trilaxian. I'm surprised they even let one enroll. What the gossiping students failed to notice was Professor Klevic's compound eyes occasionally darting toward the silent human. Unlike his students, the old war master had fought across hundreds of worlds against dozens of species. He recognized the stillness of R. Blake for what it was. Not the blankness of fear, but the perfect calm of something carefully calibrated and waiting. Waiting for what, the professor couldn't say. But he'd lived long enough to recognize when a predator was hiding in plain sight. And as Dravnok performed yet another flawless demonstration, drawing appreciative gasps from classmates, only Professor Klevax noticed the slight narrowing of the human's eyes. The first expression she'd shown all semester. The inevitable confrontation began, as these things often do, with a mistake. Not the human's mistake, mind you. She made remarkably few of those. No, it was Dravnok who committed the cardinal sin of galactic politics. He noticed her. 3 weeks into the Mortal Strike sequence module, Professor Klevax announced they would hold qualifying matches. The top performers, he explained, clicking his remaining mandibles together, will represent our academy at the Interstellar Combat Championships. The bottom performers will represent their species in the medical bay. Pairing assignments are posted. The training hall erupted in the universal language of competitive youth. Boasting, threats, and the occasional territorial display that violated academy decency protocols. Amid the chaos, Dravnok's attention fixed on the assignment board where his name appeared next to R. Blake, human. His exoskeletal plates rippled with indignation. "Professor!" he bellowed, voice resonating through the subsonic frequencies that made smaller species involuntarily urinate. "There must be an error in the pairing algorithm." Professor Klevax blinked all four eyes in sequence, the Viridian equivalent of an exaggerated eye roll. "The algorithm is perfectly functional, student Dravnok, but I'm paired with..." He gestured toward R. Blake, who was methodically stretching in the corner. That, the human didn't look up. "I request a challenge worthy of my abilities," Dravnok continued. "Perhaps 3 Centaurian berserkers, or one of the teaching assistants." The professor's scales flushed a shade of purple that indicated either amusement or indigestion. "The algorithm pairs students based on complementary combat profiles. If you're paired with student Blake, there must be a reason." This explanation satisfied approximately no one, least of all Dravnok, whose cultural programming included a substantial module on maintaining face. His inner eyelids narrowed to slits as he stalked across the training floor, looming over the human with practiced intimidation. "You," he said, the translator struggling to convey the precise mixture of contempt and threat. "You will withdraw from our match." "Ah." Blake looked up, making eye contact for perhaps the first time all semester. Her expression remained neutral, but she stood, revealing herself to be exactly half Dravnok's height, and perhaps a quarter of his mass. "No," she said. The simplicity of the response seemed to confuse Dravnok more than any elaborate refusal could have. His secondary breathing vents flared open, a warning sign that combat xenobiologists typically recommended retreating from at maximum speed. "Perhaps," he recovered. "You misunderstand. This is not a request. I am protecting you from humiliation." "Understood," R. Blake replied. "See you tomorrow." She turned and walked away, leaving Dravnok vibrating with a mixture of rage and confusion that caused nearby electronic devices to malfunction. By evening meal, the Academy buzzed with news of the confrontation. Betting pools emerged with odds so comically lopsided that several economics professors considered using them as examples of market failure. The quantum communications hub experienced unprecedented traffic as students contacted homeworlds to secure additional funds for wagering. "I heard the human doesn't even have redundant organs," said a Proxian cadet, all three of his hearts pounding with excitement. "One hit from a Calaxian strike and she'll just stop functioning." 17 seconds, predicted a Varalian mathematician. "That's my calculation for time until incapacitation." "You're assuming she even shows up," replied his study partner. "Smart money says she'll claim illness or injury beforehand." R. Blake ate her meal quietly at the end of a mostly empty table, methodically consuming a nutrition packet optimized for human biology. If she heard the speculation swirling around her, she gave no indication. Once finished, she deposited her tray in the recycler and headed toward the dormitory section. Professor Klovex watched her departure from the faculty table, mandibles working thoughtfully over his evening nutrient paste. Beside him, the Academy director leaned in conspiratorially. "Should we cancel the match? The diplomatic incident if a human is killed?" "Interesting," interrupted Klovex, "that you assume which student requires protection." He set down his nutrient tube. "Tomorrow will be educational for everyone." The Academy's combat arena resembled the unholy offspring of a surgical theater and a gladiatorial coliseum, which was precisely what the architects had intended. Tiered seating surrounded a perfectly circular platform of smart material that could adjust its properties from soft as moss to hard as diamond, depending on how badly the instructors wanted to punish failure. Today it was set to unforgiving but non-lethal, the administrative equivalent of plausible deniability. By mid-morning, not a single seat remained empty. Students who should have been attending xenolinguistics or advanced wormhole theory had developed sudden mysterious ailments requiring observation of combat therapy. Even the notoriously reclusive quantum physics faculty had emerged from their time-dilated laboratories, lured by the mathematical elegance of such overwhelming odds. Dravnok entered from the eastern portal, as befitted his status. He had opted for traditional Calaxian battle attire, minimal protective gear that displayed rather than concealed his natural armaments. His exoskeleton gleamed under the arena lights, freshly secreted that morning to ensure maximum intimidation factor. Behind him trailed 4 Calaxian compatriots, performing the ritualistic pre-battle chants that had preceded the extinction of at least 3 sentient species. "Quite the entrance," remarked Professor Klovex to a colleague. One might think he was facing actual competition. The western portal remained conspicuously empty. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the scheduled start time came and went. Dravnok performed stretching exercises that seemed designed primarily to display his impressive musculature to the increasingly restless audience. "Perhaps," ventured the Academy director from his premium observation pod, "the human has reconsidered." "Unlikely," replied Klovex. "Humans have many flaws, but they rarely—" The professor broke off as the western portal slid open with significantly less ceremony than its eastern counterpart. R. Blake walked in alone, wearing the standard training uniform with no modifications or enhancements. She carried no weapons, wore no protective gear, and had applied no visible stimulants or combat enhancers. Her hair remained tied back in the same practical arrangement she wore to every class. The arena fell into the special kind of silence that occurs when a large group collectively realizes they're about to witness something deeply uncomfortable. Professor Klovex activated the ceremonial chime, its resonant tone signaling the formal commencement of proceedings. Qualifying match between Dravnok of Calax Prime and R. Blake of Earth. Standard Academy rules apply. Incapacitation or surrender determines the victor. Medical drones are standing by. This last bit he added with particular emphasis, his compound eyes fixed on the human. Dravnok strode to the center of the arena with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat and couldn't conceptualize it as a possibility. His posture shifted into the opening stance of Calaxian combat form, a brutal martial tradition optimized by evolutionary algorithms and thousands of years of practical battlefield application. "I will attempt to leave enough of you intact for regeneration," he announced, the translator struggling to convey the precise nuance of his promise/threat. R. Blake approached the center circle with an unhurried gait. She assumed no recognizable stance, simply standing with arms at her sides, weight distributed evenly. "Thank you for the match," she said, voice pitched to carry no further than necessary. Professor Klevex signaled again. "Begin." What happened next occurred so quickly that several species with slower visual processing complained afterward that the match should be reviewed at reduced speed. For the majority of observers, however, the sequence was all too clear and utterly confounding. Dravnok launched forward with his species' characteristic acceleration, exoskeletal plates rippling to reduce air resistance. His primary strike appendage extended for a textbook incapacitating blow to the torso, a move that had earned him perfect scores in 17 previous matches. The human wasn't there. She had shifted. Not dodged, not jumped, not performed any recognizable evasive maneuver, but simply ceased to occupy the space where Dravnok's strike landed. This was, by all observable physics, impossible. Yet the recording drones would later confirm, at the precise microsecond when contact should have occurred, R. Blake had somehow calculated the exact minimum movement required to render the attack ineffective. Dravnok's momentum carried him forward, his combat programming already adapting to the miss. He pivoted with devastating speed, secondary limbs deploying in a fan pattern designed to make escape impossible. The movement would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. A perfect demonstration of why Calaxians were considered apex predators in 3 star systems. The human's response defied conventional combat logic. Instead of retreating from the overwhelming offensive, she stepped into it. Her right hand made contact with Dravnok's central joint connector, a spot so well protected that most species didn't bother targeting it. That touch was all. Just a touch. Then Dravnok, pride of Calax Prime, an evolutionary pinnacle of combative adaptation, collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a roar of defiance. He simply stopped functioning, crumpling to the arena floor with all motor controls simultaneously severed. The silence that followed held a quality rarely experienced in the Academy. The complete absence of sound that occurs when multiple species are collectively re-evaluating fundamental assumptions. R. Blake stepped back, hands returning to her sides. "He'll regain motor function in approximately 3 minutes," she said to Professor Klevex. "No permanent damage." The professor's mandibles worked silently for a moment before he found his voice. Match concluded. Victor R. Blake of Earth. Medical drones swarmed over Dravnok's immobilized form, their diagnostic beams finding no injury to treat. His vital signs remained optimal, his consciousness fully aware. He simply couldn't move, trapped in an exoskeletal prison of his own magnificent body. From the VIP observation pod, the Academy director turned to his diplomatic relations advisor. "What just happened?" The advisor, a Thalaxian with advanced degrees in 17 disciplines, replied with rare professional candor. "I have absolutely no idea." As R. Blake exited the arena with the same unassuming demeanor with which she had entered, the stunned audience remained frozen in disbelief. Everyone except Professor Klevex, whose mandibles had arranged themselves into what his species recognized as a smile. Chaos erupted in 17 different languages as the arena emptied. The Academy's communication network nearly collapsed under the weight of outgoing transmissions as students rushed to inform their homeworlds that everything they knew about interspecies combat hierarchy had just been dramatically recalibrated. Dravnok was carried to the medical bay, despite his increasingly vocal protests that he required no assistance. His motor functions had indeed returned precisely when R. Blake had predicted, but his dignity remained critically wounded. His Calaxian compatriots surrounded his recovery pod, hissing conspiratorially in their native tongue, with the translator functions deliberately disabled. Meanwhile, a revolution was occurring in the Academy's social structure. Species that had never acknowledged humans were suddenly discovering a fascination with Earth culture. The library's Earth History archives, previously accessed only by xenoanthropology students writing papers on primitive pre-interstellar societies, now had a waiting list 300 names long. "I heard humans have a redundant nervous system," whispered a Proxian cadet, blissfully unaware that his statement was both incorrect and being broadcast via his malfunctioning personal translator. "My cousin's roommate once visited their solar system," claimed a Thrallaxian. "Said the gravity fluctuations drive most species mad. They train in 9 times standard gravity." Blake herself had returned to her regular schedule, attending xenobiology as if she hadn't just shattered the Academy's most fundamental social construct. The only visible change was that her usual back row seat had been vacated by its previous occupants, leaving a conspicuous empty radius around her. Professor Clevex found her in the Academy's arboretum that evening, sitting cross-legged before a Terran bonsai tree, a miniaturized version of a life form that, on Earth, often stood hundreds of feet tall. The symbolism was not lost on the old War Master. "The Academy Director has received 17 formal complaints," he announced without preamble, his exoskeleton creaking as he lowered himself onto a bench designed for approximately 2/3 of his mass, "and 43 applications from students requesting transfer to your combat cohort." R. Blake remained focused on the tiny tree. "I assume Dravnok filed most of the complaints." Surprisingly, no. His species values effectiveness above all. He is recalibrating his assessment of you. The professor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "The complaints primarily concern your failure to disclose your true combat capabilities during enrollment." I answered every question accurately, yes. "That's rather the problem." Clevec's compound eyes reflected the Arborian's specialized lighting. "The enrollment questionnaire asks if applicants have formal military training. You indicated no." "I don't." "Then perhaps you might enlighten an old war master as to how you neutralized a Calaxian apex warrior with a technique I've never witnessed in 8 centuries of combat experience." R. Blake finally turned to face him. "Earth isn't what most species think it is, Professor. We're not primitive. We're private." The professor waited, long accustomed to the power of silence in extracting information. "Humans develop differently," she continued after a measured pause. "Most species evolved natural weapons, then built technological ones based on the same principles. Claws became blades, venom became chemical weapons. Calaxian armor became the template for battleship plating." She gestured to her own form. "We had none of those advantages. No claws, no venom, no natural armor. What we had were pattern recognition abilities and neurological adaptability. We didn't build weapons based on our bodies. We reprogrammed our bodies to become weapons." Clevet's posture shifted subtly. "You're referring to the human martial arts mentioned in your historical archives. Those are the public versions, watered down, sportified." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "What I use today is called the quiet hand. It's not taught in any public dojo. It's the culmination of 5,000 years of studying how to turn the body's electrical system against itself. One touch disrupts the neural pathways, temporarily for training, permanently in actual combat. And your government allowed you to bring such knowledge to an interspecies academy." R. Blake's smile faded. "I'm not here by accident, Professor. I'm here because Earth is joining the galactic community, and we needed to establish certain understandings without triggering diplomatic incidents or formal combat challenges." "A demonstration," Cleves concluded, mandibles clicking in what might have been appreciation. "Exactly. Humans won't be underestimated again. We don't need exoskeletons or venomous appendages. We've spent millennia learning to defeat them with nothing but pressure points and timing." The professor rose with surprising grace. "Your demonstration has been noted. I suspect tomorrow's combat class will have a remarkably attentive audience." As he turned to leave, he added, "The Interstellar Combat Championship Committee has requested your participation. They're particularly interested in a rematch with student Dravnok. He'll have adapted his approach by then." R. Blake observed. "Indeed," agreed Clevex. "And will you adapt yours?" R. Blake finally stood, her small form silhouetted against the miniature earth tree. "Professor, what you saw today wasn't my approach. It was my introduction. The following morning, the Academy's social hierarchy had undergone the most dramatic restructuring in its 300-year history. The combat training hall filled to capacity 15 minutes before class began, a previously unrecorded phenomenon. When R. Blake entered, conversations hushed, and species that had previously ignored her existence now tracked her movements with a combination of fascination and newly discovered respect. Even more telling was Dravnok's behavior. The Calaxian approached her directly, exoskeletal plates arranged in the formal pattern of professional acknowledgement. "Your technique," he said without preamble. "I wish to learn it." From the instructor's platform, Professor Klavix observed the interaction with all four eyes, his ancient warrior's instincts recognizing the moment for what it was. Not just a shift in one academy's social dynamics, but the beginning of a fundamental reordering of galactic power structures. The quiet human had spoken volumes without saying a word, and now the galaxy was finally listening. News travels fast in a society with quantum communication. News about the complete upending of established interspecies power dynamics travels faster than that, roughly at the speed of institutional panic. Within a week of what Academy students now referred to simply as the touch, diplomatic vessels from 17 major civilizations had arrived in orbit around the station. Official reasons varied from routine educational inspection to cultural exchange program evaluation, but everyone understood the real purpose: intelligence gathering about the supposedly primitive humans who had somehow hidden combat capabilities that rendered natural evolutionary advantages irrelevant. The Academy director found himself hosting more high-ranking officials in 7 days than the previous 7 years combined. His office, designed to subtly intimidate visiting dignitaries with its elevated throne-like chair and carefully calibrated atmospheric settings, now seemed woefully inadequate as representatives from the galaxy's most powerful species crowded into it, pretending they weren't all there for the exact same reason. "I assure you," the director told the Viridian High Commander, "the Academy had no prior knowledge of the humans' specialized abilities, and yet," replied the High Commander, scales shifting to a skeptical shade of orange, "your combat professor placed her against our most accomplished warrior." Professor Klavix, mandibles arranged in his most neutral position, simply blinked his compound eyes in sequence. "The algorithm makes the matches. I merely implement them." Across campus, the ripple effects continued to reshape centuries of established hierarchy. Species previously dismissed as non-combative were being re-evaluated. Dining hall seating arrangements, those sacred indicators of social standing, underwent reorganization so complex that 3 quantum topology students developed a new mathematical theorem just to explain it. R. Blake now sat at a table that never emptied. Students rotated through the seats around her, asking questions that ranged from respectful to absurd. Is it true humans can turn off their pain receptors at will? Do you really have backup organs hidden inside your skeleton? Can your combat technique work on non-carbon-based life forms? To all these, R. Blake offered the same polite but minimal responses that had previously been misinterpreted as timidity rather than the disciplined conservation of energy it actually was. The most significant change came in Combat Class 555, where Professor Klavix had implemented a curricular revolution. Species were no longer grouped by evolutionary category, but by strategic approach. The revision exposed uncomfortable truths. Many naturally superior warriors relied entirely on physical advantages rather than technique or innovation. "Today," announced Professor Klavix to the newly organized class, "Student R. Blake will demonstrate the principles of adaptive combat." She moved to the center of the training floor, somehow seeming larger than her physical dimensions would suggest. "The fundamental mistake," she began, in a clear, measured voice that commanded complete attention, "is believing that combat is primarily physical. It isn't. Combat is information management with biological consequences." From the back row, now populated by formerly front-row species still adjusting to their new status, Dravnok watched with an intensity that suggested he was recording every word for transmission back to his homeworld. In the weeks that followed, 17 diplomatic treaties were quietly renegotiated. Trade routes previously closed to human vessels suddenly opened. Technology exchange programs that had classified humans as recipient species only were reformulated as mutual development initiatives. None of this officially had anything to do with a single combat demonstration at an educational facility, of course. Galactic politics would never admit to being influenced by something so minor. Yet the correlation between the timing of these changes and the touch was, as the quantum topology students might say, statistically improbable to the point of certainty. On the last day of the academic quarter, Professor Klevix found Blake in the arboretum again, this time pruning the bonsai tree with precise, measured movements that echoed her fighting style. "Your government must be pleased with the results of your enrollment," he observed. She smiled slightly. "They are. Though I think they underestimated how quickly things would change. As did everyone, it seems." The professor settled his aging exoskeleton onto the bench. "The Academy has received 738 applications from human students for next year. The director is concerned we're about to become an Earth colony." "Unlikely," Blake replied. "Most of them won't have my training." What happened with Dravnok wasn't representative of average human capabilities. "No," agreed Klevix. "But perception creates its own reality in galactic politics. You've ensured humans will never again be underestimated, which I suspect was the entire point." She made a final cut to the miniature tree, stepping back to observe the perfect balance she'd created. Sometimes the best way to prevent a fight is to win it before it begins. The Galactic Academy for Extraordinary Combat Arts remained extraordinary only in its name, but its purpose had been fulfilled in ways its founders never anticipated. It had, indeed, become what its brochure claimed: a place where the galaxy's fighters could discover new approaches to interspecies conflict. Just not in the way anyone expected. As the next class of students prepared for arrival, rumors already circulated about the quiet, unassuming humans who would join them. Observing the nervous energy of his incoming Calaxian students now requesting additional training in neural defense techniques, Professor Klevix couldn't help but appreciate the cosmic irony. A species with no natural weapons had just revealed itself to be the most dangerous of all. Sometimes the loudest statement is made with the quietest touch.